Welcome to Her Story, the history of Southeast Asia told from her perspective. We'll discover historical figures, matriarchal societies, and contemporary female icons, and maybe learn about ourselves along the way. I'm Magas Ramirez. This is part 2 of Prinsesa Urduja of Tawalisi, where we seek to uncover the story of a legendary warrior princess. While she was recorded in the travel accounts of Ibn Batuta in the 14th century and is a popular heroine in the Philippines, we still don't actually know for sure where Tawalisi is. We are joined by filmmaker Tiffanie Ang, who directed the short film Princess Urduja. Tiffanie is a University of the Philippines Film Institute graduate, the creative director of VISH Media, and a freelance video and digital content producer who podcasts at Harvest Hour. Her short film was an official selection at both the 2013 International Student Film and Video Festival in Beijing and the 2014 Manhattan International Film Festival in New York. It won Best Screenplay at the 2015 Asian Youth Indie Film Festival in Malaysia and was the 2016 recipient of the Ani ng Dangal Award for Cinema by NCCA. Princess Urduja is about two interweaving stories set in completely different worlds, the real and the fantastical. The protagonists, Princess Urduja and a soldier's wife, both deal with grief and the passing of their respective companions. With awakening as its central theme, the film does not solely focus on their sorrow. Instead, it sheds light on the lead character's ability to rise up out of their situation and their decision to accept their new lives as the leader of their own dominion. The film is set on one quiet night when Rita, a soldier's wife, tells her two children the tale of Pangasinan's legendary warrior, Princess Urduja, as she goes in a search to find her missing brother, Haring Mahabala. An unexpected visitor interrupts the storytelling as he delivers a letter that will forever change Rita's life and the course of the Pangasinan tale. Welcome to the podcast, Tiffanie.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me guest here in your podcast. And is this the 10th episode? Am I right?
This is the
11.
technically the 10th episode, but this will be like a three-part um I said two-part but three-part. It's
Oh,
like a
nice.
three-part episode. Because I wanted to devote like 1 month to this interview. So,
Yeah. So yun. So
okay.
congratulations since this is the 10th. That's already a feat. So yun. And what a special episode because we're talking about Princess Urduja, something close to my heart.
Yes, so what happened was I was looking through YouTube for anything that I could use,
Mm-hmm.
and then I saw your short film, and
Nice.
then I thought I needed to get in touch with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked you up on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
and then I looked you up on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
and then I realized we were
Your
classmates 10
classmates,
years
yeah.
ago.
Small world.
What are the odds that I was
Yeah, I
classmates
was
with you
quite
10
shocked
years
also. Na
ago?
parang of all people,
Yeah.
well,
What are the odds of this? So serendipity.
yep.
Okay. So my first question for you is why Princess Urduja?
Okay, so before shooting my short film, I knew beforehand that it should be an ode to my late grandmother. As I was still going through grieving stage at that time. And in film school, it's a requirement to go through like a certain period of research before you get that go signal from your thesis advisor to actually shoot on location. And at the time, everything about my thesis, the concept, the logistical feasibility, even my literary references, my thesis advisor even, because he's from Pangasinan also. So they all point to one thing, which is the province of Pangasinan. And then
Wait,
eventually,
hang on. Your
yeah,
grandmother was from Pangasinan. Your thesis
yes.
advisor was from
Yeah.
Pangasinan.
So, yeah,
That's
everything just
fascinating.
convened and met there.
Yeah.
So, yun. So, parang originally, it was just Pangasinan as a location, but eventually it led me to the discovery of Princess Urduja, or in Tagalog, Prinsesa Urduja. So, story wise, originally I was just pushing for a narrative that shows the character development of an ordinary woman who grieves, yet also at the same, also that same character has to step out of her comfort zone. Because it was her only choice, her option given, and the only option given to her, given the unfortunate circumstances. So, uh, and then as for the film treatment, I was really inspired by Alfonso Cuaron's take on A Little Princess. It's basically a film about Princess Sarah. Or in Filipino, ang Sarah ang bunting prinsesa. But Cuaron's treatment centered on magic realism with reference to Indian culture, which technically Princess Urduja is somehow interested in India if you read the references to her. So that's it.
So, having shot the film in Pangasinan and your grandmother and your thesis advisor hailing from there, how different was it when you? I'm sure you read Ibn Batuta's journal
Yes.
before you went into this project, and how different was that account from the what the Pangasinenses told you about her?
Um, Honestly, I haven't got the chance to really speak to local officials and how they really perceive Princess Urduja as a collective society. But here's my observation, well, at least from the ordinary people I've met and my relatives in Pangasinan who helped me shoot my film. The interesting thing is they highly believe that she existed and that she's a real person than a mythical being or deity. But they just know her as fierce, strong woman of the
Mm,
pre-colonial Philippines. But
like a
their
warrior
warrior
princess,
like
yeah.
something like that. But their knowledge of her doesn't involve so much details because in our class, or at least in our historical classes, you know a lot of details about the Spanish occupation. So Rizal, Bonifacio, etc. But I think there was also this one point during my research na I remember being so frustrated because I'm sort of asking myself na how come there are more literary references to Limahong in the local library of Pangasinan as opposed to Princess Urduja. Limahong or something basta that guy, parang that guy version of Princess Urduja. So
Ah, I see.
but upon reading the accounts of Iban Batuta, although there's not much extensive information in comparison to our local heroes, there are a lot of interesting points about Princess Urduja that struck me. Like, for example, how she actually got furious when Iban Batuta didn't come to them at the banquet when she invited him, simply because he
Yes,
thought
yes.
that they were infidels.
Yeah,
And
because he could
then
not eat their food.
yes. And then it's also
Mhm.
interesting to note na um Ivan Batuta mentioned how many languages Princess Urduja spoke. I think there's Turkish, Arabic, Malay. And I think some articles even pointed out that she knew Chinese and other indigenous languages of the Philippines. So you can really
Mm.
say that she's well educated. Or and perhaps, she had a lot of diplomatic ties with several nations so that she would be that well versed. So
Mhm.
yes, and then she was also interested in India, the pepper country. And so
Yeah, she wanted to take over India. Yeah.
exactly, because I'm not sure if it's the spices because we were taught in Hekasi
Yeah.
or like social studies that it's the
Yeah,
other way
yeah.
around.
Yeah, she
Or-
she said something like, well, according to Ibn Batuta, she said something like, I am very interested in the land and the people, and I must conquer it.
yeah, so
And
she's
then
really that ambitious and
yeah,
fierce.
and then he just replied, "Okay, do it." And like,
Yeah,
okay,
and just do it.
go
And
do
then
it. Mm.
yeah, it's so interesting also how like every battle is I feel like her every battle is like a trophy that she must win at all costs. And then yeah, and then she's somewhat representative of our hunt. I mean, in that aspect, she's like a representative of our hunter gatherer culture in the Philippines before the Spaniards came. And then the very notable thing was she wanted a husband braver, stronger, and wiser than herself.
Yes.
So for me, she's really like the representative of hashtag girl power through and through.
Because she would only marry a man who could defeat her, and nobody did or nobody dared. So she
Yeah.
stayed unmarried. Yeah.
So yeah, in conclusion, I guess no. All these things, I think the representation of Princess Urduja by Iban Batuta is far more, in a sense, colorful or
Mm.
more interesting of a personality than how she is perceived or remembered in the local setting of the typical ordinary resident of Pangasinan.
Right. So I have to admit, like when I was laying out the episodes,
Mm-hmm.
I thought like I have to do something on the Philippines, right? So I thought, who do I know from the early age of commerce in Southeast Asia? It's Filipino, and I thought Princess Urduja, that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started reading, and then I found out that my entire childhood was sort of a lie. Um,
Oh, in what sense?
Because as I found out while I was researching for the podcast, many scholars believe that Ibn Batuta actually plagiarized Marco Polo and other
Oh,
writers, and that yeah, many people believe that she never actually existed.
yeah. I guess I kind of remember also. I'm not sure if it was Rizal, but I think there's one like Filipino historian, I think, who sort of disputed it also. So yeah, that's one thing.
That was Rizal. Rizal said
Yeah,
she was from Pangasinan.
Rizal, correct.
Yeah,
Okay. Good
right.
thing I
Yeah.
didn't mix it with mix it up with
Yeah.
someone.
So Rizal said she's from Pangasinan, and then other scholars said no, and then um other scholars, notably Pangasinenses, said she was real. And then when you go to the historical records, there's just no match, and it's very like it honestly felt like, you know how when you find out Santa Claus isn't real, that's how I felt like
True.
the Princess Urduja wasn't real.
Yeah.
Okay,
So what I am
so
now.
that I was actually scared to do an episode on her because it's like, okay, I might get into I
I
might get
see.
into fights
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
So but that's okay. We're here to discover things.
Mm-hmm.
So um
Healthy
what do you
discussion.
think?
It's fine as long as it's healthy
Yeah,
discussion.
healthy discussion. What do you think? What do you think? Was she real? And if she was real, was she in the Philippines?
I personally think she is both.
Hmm.
Both meaning she could really be a historical character that existed in 14th century Philippines. Of course, with much dispute by a lot of people. But of course, as it is with most writing, whether literary or bibliographical, I kind of believe that every story will be biased, based and
Hmm.
biased depending on the writer's perception. So sometimes what may be factual to one could be an exaggeration to another. So that's what I believe. And
Hmm.
then, as a 14th century figure, and we're talking about languages and geographical terminologies that are so different now from way before. So I think it takes so much research and resources to really prove whether factual or not. So my stand is Princess Urduja could be both. She's really a historical figure, but it could be that some of the
Hmm.
narratives that tell of her that we could find today are already fusions of cultural accounts and narratives, or may not, or may even have something to do with the real Princess Urduja. So I think that's my stand.
I kind of feel the same way. Like there must have been a person, there must have been a basis for this, but
Yeah.
it just got lost over time and over translations. And um but I think ultimately it doesn't really matter like whether she was real or not.
Oh.
There's a legacy. Your short film is part of that legacy. So why do you think in general she remains interesting to Filipinos?
Well, I guess as a nation that somehow gives their women almost equal opportunities, freedom, and respect that is due to men, Princess Urduja will always be somewhat like a symbol for us on how women play a significant role in our society. And in pre-colonial Philippines, where datus, rahas are the most respectable positions, uh, I think it's far more interesting to hear a woman who can actually lead and do stuff and be in the middle of the battle, which is like a role that's normally reserved for men. So apart
Mhm.
from that, I guess it's interesting to imagine also how fine, grand, or extravagant her fashion sense would be during her time. Like how educated she is. I mean, my gosh, how many languages she knew, how she's well versed in war, battle, all these things. And I think she's just an epitome of a true Filipina. So that's why her legacy holds true, or like her legacy still like holds until today. And also one interesting observation, well, at least in Pangasinan, there are a lot of instances when I saw women drive motorcycles and tricycles in the province. And I'm not so sure
Mm.
if that's what you call like manifestation of Urduja's legacy as a symbol of how women are viewed and revered in society. But I'd like to think that it can mostly be attributed to having Urduja as a symbol or heroic figure that's they can call proudly Pangasinan.
I think that it would have an impact because they would grow up with hearing about this warrior princess from the
Yeah. And
distant past,
even
and she lived here.
yeah, even there, I think there's this one building. It's a not building, like it's a sort of house, and I've been through there when I did my research. It's a house reserved for I think the governor, and they really named it Urduha House or like Urduha Residence or something. And they also named like a film festival after her. So she's really quite parang her legacy is really there. She's there. She's tangible.
She brings people together. It feels like when you look at how many streets or schools are named after
Yeah,
her, and there's a festival and
I
everything.
know
She
there's
she
a
brings people together.
restaurant. Yeah, there's a restaurant named after her. I think even a hospital.
Yes, yes, there is also a hospital. So I guess the question of whether she was real or not, I guess it doesn't really matter anymore because she's always real to someone.
Yeah,
And
exactly. It doesn't have to be super collective of a society naman, na whether they believe in her like 100%. As long as somehow like a few really trust and like made an impact. I mean, her name made an impact to them. I think that's enough
mm,
already. I mean, that's enough that you can say that she has a legacy already.
and taking off from that, do you think there's not just about Princess Urduja but about other maybe pre-colonial heroes and heroines? Is there what do you think we should be doing to introduce them to a new generation of kids who might not be hearing about them anymore?
This is like one of the questions that I think I have a lot to say. So pardon me if it's gonna be lengthy. Because yeah, I think that this is the question that I resonate most by far. But yes, I personally think that we should strive to tell stories about yeah like this, our culture, our people, our historical figures, and even the mythical ones to the Filipino reader or audience. And for me as a filmmaker, as a creative person, right, this is like the biggest challenge actually of our time, because with the
Mm.
dominance of K-dramas globally, what I find so amazing is their ability to make use of something fictional, even something historical, and something innately
Yes, they
cultural.
do.
I mean, Joseon Dynasty, but they can make it so relevant today.
Yes. I remember when you know that drama, the only one I know about, Jewel in the
Oh
Palace.
yes, that's like a big hit
When
during that time.
because I personally don't watch K dramas, but my mother does. And when and then she would start talking about Korean history, and I'm like, what is
Yeah.
this
But
is
you get
amazing.
yourself into it. You get yourself involved into it. And what's so
Yeah, it's pretty
interesting is
amazing
that
how they do it.
yeah, they wrap all these things, historical figures, or like even something cultural in a very interesting narrative that transcends the understanding of audiences across different cultures, because they make it so relatable using
Mm-hmm.
universal themes like of struggle, of sorrow, of revenge, triumph. And I think all these things, you have a powerful material and story to tell.
And it is a bit because personally I didn't know much about Princess Ordua, and I'm already studying history, so
Yeah.
I feel like we need to be doing something. um
Yeah.
I guess this podcast is part of trying to mainstream
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Agree. Because even though I think the what do you call this, the attempt of others is of course to do it in writing. Actually, at one point in my life I sort of believe that we should be writing all these. I'm not sure if like writing or like doing accounts of what happened in their day is like something of this generation, but I find it necessary, because if we didn't have like something like this, well, at least we're digitizing it through podcasts. But if we don't
Mhm.
have like all these bits of information, like how this day will exist in the future generation. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting how social media has democratized history, because for the longest time history was really just about people in power, and
Hmm.
if you did not belong to a particular class you did not get written about. So um yeah, I guess there's like a lot of things we need to ask ourselves as
Yeah.
filmmakers, as historians, as writers, about what we need to do for a current generation to be aware and interested about all these things.
I kind of just noted this for the question, and it's something that I kind of wanted to tell in this podcast. I
Mm-hmm.
remember this one advice I got from my supervisor during my first few years in the industry, and he saw my short film back then. And I couldn't remember what he said verbatim, but the gist of the message was, when you make a story by weaving the current reality into folklore or something cultural, it's a far more powerful piece than an ordinary narrative. So I think from this point, I sort of want to encourage the listeners of this podcast that whether you're an artist, a writer, a filmmaker, or maybe just a humble creative person, I kind of strongly encourage you to look beyond the trends. Uh, Folklore and culture does not necessarily equate to boring. It's the universal state of being human, with the myriad of emotions that come in package with being a human. That is the key element in making a beautiful piece of art. So if you kind of give due respect also with all these cultural like stories we have, like representations and figures we have, then if you can make something so beautiful about it, then I guess it's the pride of the nation also that's in your shoulders. Well, I mean, that's my piece.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 10, Prinsesa Urduja of Tawalisi. Producing a podcast like this takes a lot of time and research. If you like what we do and want to support the next episodes, head on over to our Patreon. Thank you to Laura, Yati, Kara, and Mando for being there throughout this whole thing. So give as little as $1 to get a copy of the show notes with all the references, access to the close friends Instagram stories, a shout out at the end of the next episode, and the occasional bonus episode. And if you can't join us on Patreon, just tell your friends about this podcast. That works too. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Her Story C Pod. That's Her Story SEA Pod.
You've heard of the terms colonization or decolonization in bits and pieces. But do you find European colonization too broad and too complicated to get into? Well, there is now a podcast for you. Join me, Fidellithy, on an introduction through the history of colonization. We will cover not just the major wars and conquests that took place, but also the perspectives of people who have been neglected in the grand Eurocentric narrative of discovery in colonial lens. You can find the History of Colonisation podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast from.